You have to be able to slice up that brain to see the damage of those tau proteins, right?
Welcome to the Brain Lady Podcast with your host, Karen D. Wood, the resident brainiac. Get ready for a mind-expanding journey as we unravel the mysteries of the brain from Notes from the Couch. Join us as we delve into the complexities and wonders of this enigmatic supercomputer. Fasten your mental seatbelts and prepare to have your synapses fired up. Welcome to the captivating world of the Brain Lady Podcast.
Welcome back to the Brain Lady Podcast, Notes from the Couch. We are recording here in the podcast lair with the podcast guru, Phil. And we have the co-host, Jermaine Jackson.
Hey, we back. Karen D. Wood. Love being back on the podcast with you. Can you show me your hoodie?
Look at new hoodie.
I don't think I've ever seen you in a hoodie.
You haven't seen me in a hoodie.
And you got a Brain Lady Podcast white hoodie. I like it. I approve.
And on the back, it's got the QR codes. When I'm in the grocery store, it says "Got Tension" and
"Got Tension," not "Got Milk," but "Got Tension."
Got Tension. So I'm wearing this today because it feels. This is what I would wear to a football game, a big old sweatshirt. And we've got kind of a different topic coming today.
I like it. Okay.
And so the note from the couch today is usually from my office. Mm-hmm. Things people say, and we usually springboard off of that. But today we're kind of doing a part 2 of the notes from the couch at
your house.
At my house.
Right. So what do we have today? You got on your football sweatshirt, hoodie with the Brain Lady Podcast. So what is the note from the couch from your house that we have today?
I know I feel a little bad wearing this sweatshirt instead of the Fresno State sweatshirt. Sorry, Fresno State. Maybe I'll get that on the other side.
Yes.
So our last episode, Notes from the Couch from my house, was talking about mental health and suicide.
Yeah.
And today it's another serious topic. Okay. And the topic this time was when someone asked me in this email that I was sent early in the morning, what do we talk about suicide and football?
That's heavy.
It's really heavy, and I know I'm stepping on toes in this podcast, this episode of the Brain Lady Podcast, because I know this is like American Pie, right? American Dreams.
It is.
Society, football, Friday afternoon.
Yeah.
But what we've learned in the last 15, 20 years is the impact of football on the brain.
Wow.
So I thought we would spend a little time in this episode talking about specifically what that means. So what movie did you watch last night?
The Concussion.
The Concussion.
Yeah.
I asked you to watch
that movie was heavy. And I watched it years ago, but I just watched it from a different lens today, knowing, one, we were going to talk about this, and then I just watched it from more curiosity. I was just really curious to really see how we got to the whole concussion idea and stories and deaths and pain and all the stuff. And then to kind of look at where the NFL is now. But it's a very serious topic, and I'm glad we get to unpack it today.
And that's a very recommended movie for this topic. And that talked about some very famous NFL people who went off the rails.
Mm-hmm.
And then this precious I love his title, his neuro anatomy doctor who does autopsies.
Yeah.
And he, name's not here right now, I'll come with it later. He I love studying people who are the first people to know things, to find things in their lives. And he was really vilified and got kicked out of New York and ended up in Lodi, California, which cracks me up that he's near. And he's still an amazing man.
Yeah.
And Dr. Amen also helped with that movie. We'll talk about him in a minute and his help. Those were national NFL guys who played for years. What started this episode off in my mind was we lost in just 6 weeks' time 2 local kids from high school.
Right here in our community.
Right here in our little area of Fresno and Clovis. Won't name the high school, but 2 kids from this pod of kids in 6 weeks. They're in their early 30s. Life is hard. Marriage is ending. Erratic behaviors.
Yeah.
Children. And then the decision to end their own life. So for us to be able to talk openly about suicide.
And these two played on the same
They played
team?
the same team.
Wow.
Yeah.
Within 6 weeks of each other.
One of them was at the other one's service.
Wow.
Right? So
one ended their life. His buddy that played with him was at his funeral. And then 6 weeks later, that person ended their life.
And what we're trying to say, piggybacking on the last episode, is it all makes sense for where we come from.
It all makes sense for where we come from.
When we look at the lives and the child abuse and then the football damage, it's not just football damage. Also, the football culture is a pretty rude culture. So we talk about that alert system getting wigged out.
Yeah.
There's a lot of psychology of football as well.
Mm-hmm.
But what we're talking about today is just what happens in the brain. So I'm holding my hand up like I'm holding a precious brain, right?
Kind of like you're holding the football.
Kind of like I'm holding the football. Thank you. Exactly. I should have brought both. I meant to bring both. The inside of the brain, once it gets damaged, right, you've got a linebacker. So once this brain gets a hit, so you've got a linebacker, he's bending forward and he's hitting with the helmet. He tucks in a little bit, kabam, hits. Well, the first time it hits, the brain kind of does its thing.
Right.
Psychologist at the Dr. Amen Clinic explained it to me, a psychiatrist, that eventually it hits so many times, it's like wet cement. That brain is really soft, and it makes a dent.
Oh, wow.
May or may not heal the dent. But when we hit that area again, it's like wet cement. You put a line in the cement. So now we've got a line going in the cement, and it's not going to heal. And the more we get hit, the deeper that line gets. And then that whole region of the brain, the body's not going to function there, which is really important. It's not damaged. Ixnay on the good idea, A. It's just not going to work. Wow. And so the frontal lobe has a lot to do with our reasoning and our self-control. So if that area gets damaged, what happens to a poor wounded football player's reasoning and self-control? It's damaged. Remember in the movie that one guy was just desperate? I'm just not myself. I don't know who this guy is because his brain had changed so much. So it's not just the outside that gets damaged. It's on the inside. And this is what Dr. Amalu figured out.
Yeah.
Was that the proteins of the brain are, the gray matter in the middle of the brain is full of a bazillion little blood vessels. And every hit shatters those little blood vessels. And then it becomes like putting cement down the drain because now those are all hardened. And so it's a trigger of cascading series of neurological events.
Say that again?
Yes, it's a trigger of cascading neurological events. So this thing that they called it, CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, is this range of behaviors. And then over time, this range of behaviors becomes erratic and can't control things. And that's why it's often diagnosed as bipolar. Remember we said in the last episode that the shifter in the brain gets broken.
Yes.
That inner brain can no longer talk. And so what we're talking about is this is the outside of the brain. So here's that frontal lobe that's taking the big hits, right?
Right.
And then that temporal lobe, which does a lot of the words talking back and forth, it also gets damaged. And then we fall in football, and that damages the front and the back of the brain. So that whole brain, top getting the hits, the front and the back, and then inside, where those tau proteins are building up, they become hardened like cement. So now that brain's trying to shift,
and it can't.
Careful with that word. It's trying to shift, and it's like cement. So there's this outside damage of the brain and inside damage of the brain. And one of the things that hit me watching the movie yesterday was that Dr. Imalu figured out this one very famous guy who played for 17 or 18 years had taken over 70,000 hits to his head.
That's insane.
Well, it creates insanity is what it does because the brain's not designed for that. And so what we're trying to say is we're not here to blame anybody, or we're not here to say shame. That's not what we're here to say. This is just informational and educational, right?
Right.
So for you to know, if you've got a young one in football, this is to know the brain is filled with fluid.
Right.
It's got fluid on the outside. But it's not designed for that cushion. So then the brain, so he put up a really cool drawing of the brain tissue itself hitting the skull, which is full of rough edges, right? Mm-hmm. The edges are really miraculous. There's a front edge in the middle designed to hold your two lobes kind of apart. Keep the two lobes where they go. Mm-hmm. But in damage, it ends up hitting that, right? And then the brain can't recover.
Can't.
So kind of the same thing of my precious husband who had that fall a year and a half ago, front and back of his brain. And so then we have all these contacts. So this is the brain from the top, front and back. And so you can see that there's some really good ones here of damage, the right area, and it's damage to the tissue. And it's oxygen that has a harder time flowing in that. So these are the drawings of the brain flowing.
That is so interesting.
So when the brain gets damaged, then our job is to say, well, what do we do about it? If we can understand this CTE, this chronic traumatic encephalopathy, then we can say, okay, what do we do about it?
So what do we do about it?
Well, we understand it more, and we understand how early it happens, right? The movie is focused on some people who have been at this for years and years and years. Just this February, there's amazing footage of a young man in the Midwest. I'm going to give his name as honor to him because I think that's important for us to do that. He filmed himself before he took himself off the earth. Oh, don't have his name here. Sorry. Anyway, you can. Wyatt was his name.
Wyatt.
So if you Google Wyatt and
Precious Wyatt.
Yeah, Precious Wyatt is right. Beautiful kid, football star for 10 years, 18 years old, and he films himself before he decides to remove himself from the earth. And he says to his parents, I'm sorry for who I've been the last few years. I understand that's from CTE. And I understand it's going to be a long, hard journey to heal, and I can't do it. So please donate my brain to science. And he records himself this for his parent.
That is heavy.
I just sobbed and sobbed and sobbed.
That is heavy.
Because I had a kid call me right before he took his own life. Get to my mom, he says. So I know that.
What do you do in that moment? Or what did you do?
The first thing I did was went to suicide protocols to see if I could keep him on the earth, right? I didn't know where he was, how far into this he was. I just knew when he said, get to my mom,
you knew
that was bad. So I tried to get him to think and talk about something important to him. Nope, couldn't. So here's our precious kid. Yeah, there he is.
Wow.
Makes me want to just cry looking at him. Yeah. And his precious family, right? Yeah. So they donate. There's a lot of people donating brains now. And what we're trying to do is say, let's understand from him, because they had his brain tested and he is the youngest one to be diagnosed with CTE. Because the trick with this CTE, it can only be diagnosed after death. It's kind of this cruel thing. Hey, you got a head jacked up from football.
We don't have the technology.
You have to be able to slice up that brain to see the damage of those tau proteins, right?
Okay.
They have to be seen in the microscope. I know I just like sitting here and holding my hand there. And what a brave family to talk about that.
Yeah.
And get the news out that at 18, he had a severely damaged brain. So, again, we're not here to point fingers at anybody. We're here to say, hey, if you have a family mental health issue with a footballer, what can we do about it? So we're just going to take a few minutes to talk about the signs and symptoms of this thing. So we are talking about a pretty serious issue.
Yeah, we are. And
we just talked about a really recent case with a very brave family sharing about their son and the youngest CTE on record. So what do we do if we have mental health issues in our house and someone played football? How do we get curious about this? So the signs are all related to erratic behavior. Remember, the blood doesn't know how to flow anymore. The neurons don't know where to go anymore. That alert system is completely out of whack.
Right.
So if you get erratic and unpredictable behavior, now that's hard to tell, because if the person is also on drugs, the drugs might be causing that erratic behavior. So you might have a twosome. Now remember, our scale is 0 to 10, so I'm holding my hands up. If you have a person who's living in that high, apparently manic state, reactive all the time, gaslighting you all over the place, making you think you're the parent, the problem is the parent.
Right.
Ooh, get curious.
About why?
About why is this erratic behavior? Okay, we've got snotty teenagers who don't like our rules, and we say be home by 11, and they're going to give us some mouth. This is completely different from that, right?
Right.
This is much more highly reactive. And you might get into the crazy manics. They might disappear for 5 days. What do we do with that information? Worrying about them for 5 days, right? Well, they're off trying to figure out what to do with this brain that they don't know what to do with. Watch the movie Concussion. You'll get to really see what it looks
it's a really
like,
good movie.
what it feels like to be trapped in that body.
Mm-hmm.
And so then there's, what do we do? So we talked before about getting all the blood work done.
Yeah.
Is there chemicals off in the body? Is there chemicals off in the brain? And it might not show us what the tau proteins are doing, but it will show us what it is else is off or out of balance.
Mm-hmm.
And then to continue to figure out that journey of tough love, right?
Yeah.
If someone's acting erratically and we throw them out to the street to live on the street, but they've got a really damaged brain, how's that going to work? Well, it usually doesn't. So what we're talking about is Will Smith doing this amazing job in this movie, Concussion.
It was such...
He even does a Nigerian accent beautifully. My husband was raised in Nigeria, and I could feel myself
That's right.
just kind of warm from that accent. But he does a beautiful job. The other thing that's really good in this movie is he gets vilified for he does, and he says, remember, he's rubbing the belly of his wife with that unborn baby, and he says, baby, life's going to be different when you get out, and I didn't deserve this, and you don't deserve this. And it's this cry we have as parents that we don't deserve to be treated this way.
Yeah.
Sit up straight, get your exhale going. You're right. You don't. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with the brain of this person that we're loving. And if we can be more curious about it. And this Dr. Amalu got in such big trouble for his curiosity.
Yeah, he did.
Right?
I mean, it was, in watching the movie, he was bringing to light such, like, he just wanted to be a help. Like, he had no idea he was coming against this giant of the NFL, and he just thought he was doing good. And then when he realized how big the giant was, when he realized they didn't want his information,
they did not.
He was mind blown. He couldn't understand why not. Like, why wouldn't you want the help? But I'm glad he kept pushing it.
I'm glad he kept pushing it.
Yeah.
But parents trying to get help for their children or loved one or spouse, there are a lot of walls you run into where people don't understand and where they're going to be saying, we don't have the money, or you shouldn't, or don't try this, or you'll get the craziest comments from people, even in church. Exhale with me. You should just kick them out, right? But there's so much more to the issue if we understand it's a brain issue,
It's a
right?
brain issue.
And so if we can understand that. I hadn't
doctor.
seen that picture before. That's really awesome.
Yeah, that's the real guy right there. Huh? He did a lot
That's
of
really
great
awesome
work.
with that Will Smith smirk. I just love that smirk. So, okay, what can we do about it? We talked about getting blood work. We talked about
the Amos Clinic, right?
Calling
Brain
the Amos
scan.
Clinic and getting brain scans. There's a lot of people who think that's blah, blah, blah science because it's computer generated, the single proton electronic computerized tomography, SPECT scan.
What? That's a lot.
Just say SPECT scan.
SPECT scan.
That it is a computer generated response, but it shows the brain because they take the test when you're resting and then they take the test when your brain is active. So it shows if the brain's at rest, theoretically the body's, but that brain is just going nuts all the time.
That makes sense.
That tells us something, right?
Right.
And if the brain's trying to focus and it can't focus, it's going nuts in the wrong parts of the brain, well, that tells us a lot too. Because we're saying, hey, just go get a job at Burger King. Start earning some money, start paying some rent. But the scan shows that kid can't concentrate at a thing, let alone how to flip a burger, right?
Right.
And then they help make the plan. So they're very, very helpful. They'll help you set up different plans. Walnut Creek or Costa Mesa if you're a Californian.
Got it.
And it just gives you so much more information. Now, we took a client there. I'll just call him Large.
A client there. Okay.
I went with a client there with his mom, desperate for help.
And, wait, are you calling a client? What'd you call the client?
Large.
Okay.
He's a football guy.
We'll go with Large.
And he likes to be large. So there's steroids and there's all kinds of drug use.
Got
it. So we're just going to call him Large. These nicknames we give clients, right? and his precious mama. We went to the Amen Clinic. I went after the scans and everything. You need to go for 2 days.
Okay.
All the evaluations. And that precious psychologist said, hey, here's where your brain is damaged. And the kid said, so if I go back to play football, you can fix it. And that psychiatrist just went and said, if you go back to play football, I will not be your doctor. Wow. So that was a great line. And you talk about where to draw lines. Yeah. Great line. Kid went back, states away, played football, got all jacked up, more drugs, more jail time. Now he's on the streets in L.A. And here's the kicker. We're trying to figure out how to get him more help. And the only help is rehab, but that's for the drugs, right? I think he's been 8 of them. Poor mama. And so what I'm going to be in contact with the Amen Clinic about is what kind of mentorship programs do we need to this real love of walking alongside someone in this long road to recovery, right? So, but you're an exhausted parent. How are you going to get the mentor? It's just this thing we're still working on. Mm-hmm. But for those of us of faith, we know if we pray about that specific person to show up, it's kind of going to be interesting where they show up. Yeah. Right. And who's going to be doing that? But I think that's one thing the church really needs to get better on is how to walk alongside people. There's churches like Saddleback that are really trying to address mental health really specifically. Like their goal is to have support groups for every single diagnosis. Wow. Which is just really amazing. And we have some really intense good help here, like Sierra Meadows, the Dr. Tatum who started those. His goal is to have a mental health house for each kind of diagnosis. So
how many diagnoses out there?
I think we talk about the majors of anxiety and depression, right?
Right.
I've got a young client right now who just got raped last week, and what kind of help is going to be needed for that? She was in my backyard yesterday because I do therapy by the creek. And she was in her skin was crawling. She had to get the hair off the back of her neck. Those parents aren't going to be ready to help with that. So I'm going to talk with him about how can we come alongside her with that, right? And so, not a football injury, but she actually had a drowning. She was drowned and then adopted, and they forgot to tell them about the drowning part. So she has some other brain issues. Because this mental health is really complicated, right? We got autism washes in there when you talk about your diagnosis, right? And then we get into the personality disorders, which we call them disorders for insurance, but really they make perfect sense for where the person's been from if we can keep understanding that, right? So for us to say, how do we take care of ourselves loving someone in mental health is really important. How do we get the right help, whether it's the right rehab, Amen Clinic and the scans? How can we get more information about all these things? And then how can we say, if we lose someone, how do we keep talking about that and get help for it after it happens is critically important, right? But for us to understand, if we do lose someone, that was the brain damage that did that. It wasn't whether they loved us or not. That's the trick to understand. It's a very, very long road. I'm not minimizing the road at all. Yeah. We'll be doing a lot more episodes on grief and processing grief. But today, we just talked about a pretty serious topic where I knew I'd be stepping on toes. Yeah. But I think it's really important we start talking about it more.
It's important. It definitely is important.
And start saying as a culture, how do we do this football thing, protecting the brain? And so once the damage is done, to know there's active tools that we can engage in.
So do you have any advice for parents, right? Parents, you want your kids to play Pop Warner football, you want to get out there. What would be your advice for a parent that's kind of on the fence? They're thinking about, should I let my son play football? Should I not let him play football? What would you say to that parent?
It's kind of like not giving a kid a cell phone. Now you're creating a stigma by saying you're not going to play football, right? I remember I wouldn't let our youngest play football because he was a 5-foot Korean kid against those, kind of, you're going to get squashed. So I wouldn't let him play football. That was an easier line, right?
Right.
Watch the movie Concussion. It's the best advice.
Just watch the movie.
Watch the movie Concussion. Let that doctor's work speak to you. Yeah. And then I think we're going to be getting a lot more serious about flag football and some other kind of things to still keep the team camaraderie, make it more complicated, more competitive. Stay tuned for that. But And this is not just football. I should have said that from the beginning. Wrestling is just as bad, if not worse.
Boxing.
Oh, please. Boxing. Yeah. Soccer, heading the balls. They're going to be ice skating, kabam. Right. So it's anything where that precious head is at risk.
Yeah.
Right? As we were not designed to take hits.
How about rugby?
Rugby, just watch a match and see what you think. Right?
Yeah.
But then we got a problem. We're coming up against male energy and cultural community, and it's a big nationwide problem. But the point of today's episode was just to say, what can we do about it? And one of the things we want to always talk about is to sit up straight and get that exhale as you're thinking about these complex issues, to let your brain know and your mind know you want to be more curious. You want to get your information. You want to have more grace for yourself for the things you have done right or wrong, or all the guilt washes for trying to support someone with mental health. Sit up straight. Take your exhale.
This was one of those episodes that kind of dove into a lot, because my son's played football. He didn't like it as much, so he didn't play a second year, but he did play, and I know tons of people that play football. So if you've played football, or if you have questions, Karen has gave us some great resources today. So I just want to thank everybody for joining us on the podcast. Please like and subscribe, share with your friends, and we look forward to seeing you back here on the couch.
We handled some pretty heavy topics today with the idea of suicide and taking oneself off the earth. So if you know of someone that you love or are concerned about, or if you are struggling yourself personally, please immediately call 988. That's the National Suicide Hotline's new trick number, which I think is great. 988. Get into contact with it right away and don't wait. Thank you.